happy International Women's Day to all the tech women on this call. Also proud to be here. So my name is Lindsay Syhakhom. I'm an AWS solutions architect at Logicworks. I've been at Logicworks for about 7 years now. Before that, I was at Transamerica, a health insurance company. So I have a kind of diverse background and now working as a cloud architect. So today I'm going to be talking about how to protect your data in Amazon S3 using the native tools that Amazon provides you with and the power of machine learning. Let me just click this. Who is Logicworks? So Logicworks is a top consulting and managed service partner in the space. We're an AWS Premier partner. We've been in business for 30 years. We have been named a Gartner leader in their Magic Quadrant for this space. We specialize in cloud migration, managed services, managed security, mostly for companies who are in highly regulated industries. So finance, healthcare, SaaS companies. So companies like MassMutual and Pitney Bowes are our customers. A lot of highly regulated data living in the cloud. And that's what brings me to the topic we're going to discuss today. A lot of the companies that are on this slide came to Logicworks and said, we've been running in AWS for some time. We've got a significant data presence in Amazon S3. We've got, hundreds, thousands, or even millions of objects in Amazon S3. And we really want to rethink how we're thinking about data at rest and protecting data at rest in the cloud. Why is Amazon S3 such a popular data store? Well, it's cheap, it's durable, it's virtually unlimited. And one of the great things about, I know this Angelbeat today is about sort of data, AI, analytics. One of the great things about Amazon S3 is you can use it as your data store, as your data lake, for all the analytics functions that you're doing. So let's say you have source data. When you want to get it into AWS, often the first step, the first place it goes is Amazon S3. And I'm sure AWS will be talking about that in a couple of minutes. It sort of starts in Amazon S3, and it allows you to independently scale compute and storage. So you can sort of host that data in Amazon S3. When you need to do some processing on that data, you can use any of the numerous AWS analytics services, and then that transformed data or that processed data then can go back into Amazon S3. And the reason why people use it, as I said, is its durability, its high availability, and the key thing that I put lots of exclamation points onto this slide on it is $23 per terabyte per month. There's really no better, more secure solution really on the cloud market today. That's why in 2021, Amazon actually announced that on the 15-year anniversary of Amazon S3, which was last year, Amazon S3 now hosts more than 100 trillion objects, which is kind of a mind-boggling number. And that was last year, so I'm sure it hosts a couple trillion more at this point. So as I said, one of the main reasons why Amazon S3 is really the foundation of a lot of analytics work in AWS is also it has a lot of built-in security features and ways to protect it. However, a lot of the companies that I just talked about, they're used to having, a file share that's on their internal network or a database that's encrypted on their internal network or something. Some more traditional data protection models, right? They moved to S3 and they realized Amazon S3 is not sitting in their VPC, right? It is a service sitting like a global service sitting outside of their networks that has its own unique ways of protecting that data. And so we're going to get into some of those more unique ways. And one of the risks of that, right, is a lot of companies who are new to cloud, or maybe some of their staff that is new to cloud, might not understand that everything you put in S3 is not automatically protected the way that their VPC is protected. So let's dig into that. You may have heard in the news, you've seen incidents of S3 data leaks, and you may have thought, oh, maybe S3 is not a secure service or something like that. So I want to just come out right now and say S3 is a very secure service, provides lots of security tools to protect data in Amazon S3. The real issue is that some of the configurations, both on the object level and on the bucket level and on the account level, have to be custom configured and can be very granular in terms of level of access and a little bit complex. AWS has done a lot of work in the last couple of years to make things simpler to understand in terms of S3 security, but it still requires some institutional knowledge of how your business is using S3 and some sophisticated AWS knowledge. So the most common use cases we see of the reason why data leaks from S3 appear in the news is A user uploads sensitive data to a public bucket and doesn't understand that objects uploaded to a public bucket are automatically public. Or sometimes a user creates an S3 bucket, then modifies the default configuration and later uploads sensitive data. So it's really all about human error, unfortunately. And there's an entire sort of hacker cottage industry growing right now about finding and exploiting S3 buckets and exposed access keys. So really, my presentation today is going to give you some easy things that you can do today, right now, to look at your S3 profile, look at all the buckets and objects you have in there, and make sure that you're taking the right steps to protect your data. There have been some very sad stories, some of them on this slide, of people who accidentally had an S3 data leak and were not in business, 6 weeks after. So don't want you guys to be in that boat. So how do we protect our data in Amazon S3? One of the great things, as I said, that AWS does is open source a lot of ways to protect this data. And the first thing they did a couple years ago was they added a free check in AWS Trusted Advisor. If you guys are not familiar with AWS Trusted Advisor, it is kind of your optimization helper in the cloud, trying to scan your AWS account to detect misconfigurations, detect optimizations, things that you could easily check off and become a better cloud steward. So one of the free checks that they provide is this Amazon S3 bucket permissions check. So if you go and into the AWS console right now, you type in Trusted Advisor, you can get this check right now. It literally scans your S3 buckets for public access. This is a great first step because you want to know right now do the audit first, right? What are you running today? Is what is public supposed to be public? Are you surprised by some of the buckets that are public? And then have a meeting or talk to your developers and your business about what you find. That works really well if you've got a small number of buckets. And as we'll get into, many companies are in the thousands of buckets at this point. So maybe this approach may be sort of laborious. So I'm going to talk about some automated tools that you can also use. The next and most common and really simplest way to prevent yourself from ever having an S3 data leak is this feature that AWS added, I guess, a couple of years ago at this point, which is an account level block on all public access to anything in S3. So you could literally go into your AWS console right now and say, I never want to have this problem. Nothing in S3 should ever be public. Therefore, I can just block public access entirely on the account level to every single AWS S3 bucket. Now, this is not an option for everybody, right? A lot of us have a mix of public and private buckets. Maybe you're hosting, the image data for a public website in an S3 bucket. That needs to be public, obviously. So it's not an option for everybody to block public access to everything, but a great option if all you're hosting in there is some log data and some PII data, and you absolutely know you'll never want to make anything in AWS S3 public. This is a great option. The next most common way that people protect access to S3 is bucket policies. This is one of the first security tools, launched with AWS S3, Amazon S3. And it's literally like you can attach a policy to an IAM user to be able to make that user be able to do things. You can attach a policy to an AWS S3 bucket, and you can lock down a bucket by IP address. You can lock down a bucket by region. You can say that even if it's a public bucket, nobody should be able to write to your public buckets. So very specific, granular bucket by bucket policies. This is a great way to do that. The other most common way you can protect your S3 data is encryption, of course. And you can enable default encryption on a bucket so that you don't even have to think about it, right? So you create the bucket, you enable S3 default encryption, you use AWS KMS, so you don't even have to manage or rotate the keys. does it all for you. That's a great way to protect your data that even if it does get leaked, it's encrypted. If you have some existing data in S3 that you wish was encrypted and didn't encrypt the bucket sort of at the get-go, I actually wrote a blog post about this. If you Google like Logicworks S3 encryption, I wrote a blog post about how you can do that sort of post facto, that if you're in that boat. So now we've talked about sort of how to prevent AWS data leaks. I'd also just want to touch briefly on how do you get notified of potential misconfigurations. So we talked about misconfigurations are the most common problem, the source of AWS S3 data leaks. So set up an AWS config alert, establish a policy that says, I want to be notified whenever a user creates an S3 bucket that's public. If it's publicly accessible, I want to know about it. I want it to AWS config to notice it and send me an alert. Maybe that bucket is completely kosher. Maybe we're good with that. But to be able to know immediately when a user does that is really powerful. So that's AWS config. And finally, sort of ending on a high point, Amazon Macie. This was released a couple years ago. It is an extremely powerful S3 security tool that uses the power of machine learning to scan all of your S3 buckets and classify potentially sensitive data. You could also detect, suspicious activity. You could receive alarms, or you could even automatically quarantine high-risk data that's in a public bucket. So Amazon Macie will say, that really looks like PHI data. I'm just going to automatically quarantine it, notify you, and we can deal with it. So an incredibly powerful service. All of the things I just discussed, encryption, bucket policies, Macie, these are all the tools that you can use to protect S3. A lot of customers were coming to us as their consultant and saying, I'm really concerned about all the data I have in S3. I'm a healthcare SaaS company and I host, millions of health records in S3, for instance. And all this configuration is great, but how do I make this simpler? Is there a simpler way for me to know that this S3 data is protected? And that's why Logicworks, who is a consulting partner, who, is a managed service partner, not necessarily a software developer, but we build custom automation in-house all the time to take care of tasks like this, where customers ask us again and again for the same solution. So what we did was we built Logicworks Data Loss Prevention. We combined all the tools that I just described, plus Amazon Macie, into a sort of pre-configured, ready-to-go tool set that is it's no really custom underlying services. We're using all AWS native services, but have some very fancy automation that our automation engineers built to orchestrate all these services together. And what it does is, it notifies you when you've got public permissions on S3 objects or exposed AWS keys, heaven forbid. And it uses Amazon Macie, sets up automated configurations of things that we think you should be alerted on, and does that all out of the box. So what would that look like in action? Let's say one of your developers changes permissions on an S3 bucket from private to public. Well, Logicworks Data Loss Prevention would notice the change. Then they would notify our 24/7 support team. And as I mentioned, this is a tool that we're not necessarily selling off the shelf. It's a tool for the companies that we work with. So it would notify our 24/7 support team that an issue has arisen. We'd evaluate it, and then we'd then notify your team or escalate it according to your runbook. So it's really, we integrate this tool directly into Logicworks' 24/7 support team. So this tool that I just mentioned is part of our managed services practice. As sort of Ron mentioned, we are a consulting partner that really considers ourselves an ongoing partner to our customers. And that means we do things like 24/7 support, monitoring, patching, configuration management, cost management. And as you can see, all the way to the right-hand side of the screen is the Cloud Operations Complete, which is for highly regulated customers. And data loss prevention for S3, we sell as part of that service. So that's how you can get Logicworks data loss prevention for S3 if you're interested. But I hope in addition to, learning a little bit about Logicworks, you also learn some good tricks for how to protect your data in Amazon S3. And then you'll spend some time, in the next couple of weeks doing an audit of your own S3 data and making sure that the configurations that you want are the configurations you have. So hope this was useful, and feel free to ask me any questions.